Hi, Rick. Welcome to Creative First. It's a privilege having you here speaking to us very early in the morning. For the audience here, Rick Ambros is a veteran in the entertainment industry, specializing in international and local language film, television, and digital productions, including co-productions, business development, and financing across Asia, Europe, and North America. Over the years, he has worked with Fox International Productions, Sony, Universal, Warner Brothers, Paramount, MGM, to name a few. He has extensive background and work experience in India, and currently he's a consultant and executive producer for Applause Entertainment. Welcome, Rick.
Lohita, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Rick, you've been an industry veteran for years. For the benefit of our audience who might not know you, can you tell us a little bit about the several things you've done and what is your focus right now?
Sure. I would say, the through line of my career has always been international. That's always been front and center for me. And when I started off in the business as an executive at Disney in international marketing and distribution, that was not the primary focus. Most of the theatrical revenues and then home video revenues and so forth were all coming in through US releases, and the international was kind of a second thought. Fast forward to today, everything has flipped entirely. International is the most important part of the business, certainly in the theatrical business, but now also in the streaming business, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I then went to Germany and joined one of the big media companies over there and did international co-productions between the United States and the various European countries, which involved both creatively working with projects, but also very importantly, in terms of production and co-financing and so forth, and then finding buyers on both sides. And stayed in Germany for a number of years, became a producer there in terms of local language product, got involved with the film funds, which were very important in Hollywood for a number of years. They were financing a lot of the studio movies. There were a lot of tax deals coming out of different countries, especially Germany. So a lot of the slates were being financed here in the United States by equity investors or private investors from Europe. I got involved in Asia really because Fox reached out to me and hired me and said, do you want to set up a company for us in India? And I had never been to India, and it sounded like a fantastic challenge. And this was back 2006, 2008. So I did go over to India, and with Star TV, we set up Fox Television Studios, which became his own company eventually, and produced primarily, Sasbahu and formats coming from the United States. Eventually Fox became a big studio in India, Fox Star Studios. And so that was sort of my first foray into the Indian market. I got more and more interested in Asia for a lot of the obvious reasons. That's where the growth is. In India at that time was very exciting. A lot of the general entertainment channels were coming online, new channels were coming online, and the market was really growing, and there was a lot of investment coming in, especially from the United States. So since then, I've been involved with Asia, India, China, and Southeast Asia a little bit, and really that's become my focus. And it's still, I think Africa will be coming online very soon. Already Nigeria is a very important market, but Asia is still where the growth is. If you're looking at the Philippines or Indonesia, Southeast Asia, India, there's huge potential. China is its own market that has its particular challenges, and we can get into that in more detail. It's much more difficult now given the political climate, and also the Chinese party clamping down on a lot of entertainment in China itself.
So in your extensive experience working in Asia, what is it about this region, or even India in particular, that grabs your attention?
Well, it's one is just the economics, right? The population. You've got 1.3 billion people. There's so much potential still in terms of in the OTT space. People coming online to different platforms. And creatively, India to me has always been a fantastic market because it has a very old industry. And for many years, it was very domestically focused, and I guess one could argue it still is. Foreign movies don't do that well in India. It's gotten better, but traditionally they have not. Now India has really opened up in a way that people are open to different types of content, and you can credit companies like Netflix for that, or Amazon. It's allowed Indian creators to create content that they previously could not make in India because nobody would buy it. The GECs wouldn't buy it. There was no place to put it. So I think creatively, as everywhere in the world, OTT has provided this platform for telling all kinds of different stories. And we're seeing, they're being accepted. I mean, in India, India won its first international Emmy last year with Delhi Crime, which is fantastic. What a great show. There's a lot of great product coming out of India now. And, part of the things I'm working on also is to see what can travel beyond India and what kind of partnerships one can do between India and Hollywood and other parts of the world, because I think that's a new opportunity just because the content has changed. And beyond that, I think China is a very interesting market because it's so important, at least for the United States, in terms of revenues. Some Hollywood movies make or break it in the Chinese market. Some make more money in that market than they do elsewhere. So it's become a very important element for international theatrical content coming out of the United States. It's at the moment much more closed, and a lot of retrenchment. A lot of money was coming into Hollywood from China, and for the most part, that has ceased for the moment.
Rick, you were talking about the shift in content with Amazon, Netflix investing in India. What do you think triggered that? Because for the longest time, a lot of Indian stories have been inspired from storytelling and narratives in the West. What has really, brought the change?
I think just the possibility that somebody would buy the product. I think the first series that really went into that direction was Sacred Games, which was based on a New York Times best-selling book. It was a miniseries type story, something that is maybe akin to a Sopranos, something that just did not have a home in India. There was no place you could put it. A broadcaster would not buy a piece of product like that. So it really comes with the end user, the platform, that there's a place to sell it. And I think, a few people who are involved in the early shows for the streamers in India took that chance. And now, so much fantastic product is coming out. I mean, look at something like Scam 1992, which is a show you could have never made in India a few years ago. There would have been no one who would have broadcasted. So to me, that is part of it. The other is Indian audiences, particularly younger people, want to see different content. They see European content, they see Korean content, they see American content. And I think they want to see some of those stories told in India as well. So, I mean, especially in India, to me, it's very revolutionary because so much has changed in the last 5-6 years.
So as an executive producer, Rick, could you tell us a little bit more about how you really pick a project? What is it that you really look for?
I mean, yes, it starts with the creative in terms of, is it a script, an idea, a property, an article, a book, and then kind of who is involved. Sometimes is there a script already that is a starting point? Sometimes is there a director? Sometimes is there some cast? But beyond the creative, I mean, what I'm interested in is also helping put projects together. And that means in terms of co-financing. As I mentioned earlier, most of the things I'm involved with are international in scope. So, a lot of times it'll involve finding a partner. If it's a US project, maybe you need a partner in China, or an Indian project, a partner in the United States, or a European project, you need a partner in the United States. So most of these projects that interest me go beyond just the domestic market. So I would say it's a combination of creative and sort of the business side of it.
And what is the trend that you see? We are noticing that online curated content is increasingly trying to reach out to masses. Do you think that this would probably, in the future compete directly with television? Currently, it's not. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, if you look at the United States, especially, the linear channels right now have seen ratings drop tremendously. There are still more viewers on broadcast channels than on OTT channels, but it's shifting very quickly. Something like a Disney Plus or an HBO Max. We're going to have Paramount Plus in the United States, Peacock. All of this content is going to be shifted to the online platforms. So because of that on its own, the online platforms are going to grow tremendously because they're going to have the viewers. And there's a lot of cord cutting going on. People aren't going to want to pay for cable and for OTT subscriptions. So that shift will gradually happen, but also because the studios or the content makers are shifting their best content to those platforms. For many years, the premium platform in the United States was HBO. That's where you could do all the really interesting product that you could not do anywhere else. Now, there are multiple platforms that do that. And even HBO itself is shifting that content from HBO linear to HBO, OTT, HBO Max. So it's going to be consumer driven. People want to watch what they want to watch when they want to watch it. They don't want to be told. I mean, it's amazing, that there are still TV schedules. This show is on Sunday night once a week. But if you don't catch it then, at least here in the US, lots of times you can catch it on Hulu, a few days later. So this is all evolving and very interestingly here in the United States, I think there was a moment of great panic a couple of years ago at Warner Brothers and at Disney when all of a sudden they realized we're not in the streaming space. And overnight, these studios sort of had to reinvent themselves. And there was a lot of experimentation going on, still going on, especially with theatrical releases. Do we put them on the OTT platform or do we put them in the theaters or do we do a hybrid model? And now we're seeing a movement back to theatrical. Some of the hybrid models did not work that well, and some of the big theatrical movies underperformed. And yes, COVID had a lot to do with that. But if you just look at the last couple of weeks, a movie like Chang'e, from Marvel, with an Asian cast, is put only in theaters by Disney and has done tremendously well. The new James Bond film just came out in theaters, is killing it internationally. So there's a lot of hope and breathing room again that the theatrical experience is coming back. In India, that migration is happening too. Platforms like Netflix and Amazon aren't that big yet, but you've got Hotstar, which is a very large platform, and you've got so many other platforms, domestic Indian platforms that are growing. And then these American streamers, HBO Max and Paramount Plus and so forth, Apple, are all going to come to India. They can't ignore India. It's the most important market in the world. So when you have that, it's going to just explode more and more. The beauty in India is 100% FDI, foreign direct investment. There is a very, for the most part, cooperative government. I'm comparing it to China now, where you can't go in. So I think every company here in LA who's in the streaming business right now is trying to figure out their India strategy if they don't already have one.
Going back to what you said earlier, you said that people are shifting online. The best content is going online. Do you think that's because of the emergence of a personal screen, which is the mobile? And that's why, suddenly people are experimenting with content. Do you think that earlier it was more of a family phenomenon and that is why that content didn't work? How do you see the shift? It can't just be, price and accessibility. It has to be more than that, right?
No, that's a very good point. I think the devices are very important, whether it's a mobile or a laptop. I mean, I only know from my own daughter, she would never watch anything on a traditional television. Everything is on her laptop, and you can watch it anywhere you want. And in a market like India, where mobile is so big, yes, everybody's watching their content at any time they want on mobile. What I do find interesting, though, is that the content hasn't changed in the sense that it's being made for mobile, for example, right? There have been a few experiments like GB here in the United States, which is producing short form content that really didn't take off. You would think more content creators would be, making mini episodes, mobisodes that run, for as long as a subway ride, maybe, right? Or a taxi ride or an Uber ride. But it hasn't. So the content hasn't changed in the way it's made, and the old formats have stuck. The old formats, are dictated largely by the broadcasting industry because, you had an hour to slot, but you had to put your commercials in, your advertising. So you really only had on an hour drama, 48 minutes of real content, right? The rest was taken up by ads and so forth. So I do think, people are going to want to watch their content without any interruptions, which is why SVOD is taking off. AVOD is still predominant, but SVOD is growing by leaps and bounds because people are saying, rather pay $5 a month to watch my content on my mobile, on my laptop, wherever I want to watch it, and not be interrupted. I think it's an interesting point you raise. I'm always fascinated that the content, the way it's made, has not changed for the devices, but the devices accept the content as it is, and it seems to work.
Rick, with the pandemic, we saw a lot of change. We saw production pipelines change, distribution pipelines change. How do you envision the landscape in the next 5 years?
I'm very optimistic. I think, as I was alluding to earlier, a lot of the major shifts that we are seeing, especially with OTT, were already in place before the pandemic hit. The pandemic just propelled it and made it more urgent. So these things were already in place. Now, the thing that disappeared was theatrical. And we're only coming up from, being under that cloud now, really in the last few months. So I think, theatrical is going to come back, at least in the sense that the big tentpole movies, the Hollywood movies, and some of the big Indian movies with the big stars are going to have to go into theaters. People are going to want to see them there. The question is, what does it do for the product that is middle budget, lower budget? Will there be room for it in the theaters? And physically, are we going to see a retrenchment in the theaters or not? The theater chains have been hit so hard. In one sense, it's a real estate play, but on the other hand, they have no movies to show. They can't sell their popcorn. There's no business. And, a lot of them in the United States have gone under. In India, India's always been under-screened anyway. Less than 10,000 movie screens, and I think they've dropped down a bit because of COVID. Yeah. For a country that produces so many movies, there are very few theaters. If you look at China, that has probably 65,000. We in the US have 40 to 50,000 screens. So there's always only been limited place to put your movies. But what I think is going to happen is there will be theatrical for the right films. And then the question is, what's the windowing going to be? What is the window? Is it going to be 45 days before it hits OTT? I think the hybrid model is going to go away a little bit because it hasn't been that successful. I kind of compare it to when home video came online in the early 90s. Everyone thought nobody's going to go to the theater anymore because you can just get the video 6 months later and watch it. It was not the case. Exactly the opposite. It helped the business because this was when I was at Disney, because not only did you have the theatrical release, but then it was released on home video, and then you would buy the tape, afterwards. And so you had two huge revenue streams. One actually supported the other. So I think I'm very optimistic. Theatrical is gonna stay. It just might be different. And so it's ever evolving, the business, but people still want to congregate in one place. They want to have a common experience, and nothing delivers that more than going to a movie theater.
As best practice, Rick, are you seeing any innovation by theatrical chains in the US, which probably can be adapted here? Any experience that they're, trying to woo audiences?
I mean, yeah, we have the big chains here, the AMCs and so forth, but then we have smaller theaters like Landmark Theaters or ArcLights, and what they do is provide a more, I guess, upscale experience, if you want. Well, they will sell alcohol, they will sell better food than popcorn and hot dogs. In many cases, you can get, these seats that flatten out like a bed. So it is a different experience. That's a bit of a more upscale experience, I'll say, in smaller theaters. So that's been one trend. I'm just wondering, now with COVID and so forth, how quickly.
What happens to the price conscious segment,
Well, that's difficult, the price conscious segment. So the price conscious segment, typically goes to matinees during the day. They typically don't go first night, when the ticket prices might be higher, they wait. And in the United States, as in India, it depends on the market. The ticket in LA or in Mumbai is going to be more expensive than, in Kansas City or Bihar or whatever, right? So it's partially driven by that as well. But going to the theater is a very expensive proposition for, say, a family of four. By the time you're done, you're spending at least, $100, if not more.
Right.
And in India, comparable. So
yeah. Rick, as a neutral and unbiased expert in the industry, do you see some players who have cracked the formula and strategy for content development and distribution? And what's your view on it?
I think of all the companies, the best position is Disney. And I say that because they have really strong IP, whether it's Pixar or Marvel or Lucasfilm, plus their vast library of animation and so forth. So they have a lot to fall back on. They have the theme park business, they're in linear, they're in OTT, but they've also been, very quick to adapt, I have to say, to this whole streaming revolution. Disney Plus has grown very quickly here in the United States, almost overnight. They bought 20th Century Fox, and what they got with that was Star TV and Hotstar, the biggest platform in India. So, if you look at the projections, they're, by 2026, I think Disney's projected to be close to 300 million people on Disney Plus Hotstar. So that's going to leapfrog Netflix and some of the other ones. So they, it's a very well-run company. They have a lot to fall back on. They're in all the verticals. And I think, it helps having your toe in different, pots, so to speak. I think, other companies, the tech companies, as I call them, the Amazons and Apples and so forth, obviously are very well heeled. They have lots of money, but they're still newer to creating content. They don't have the libraries. Amazon bought MGM because they wanted to buy some premium IP. They wanted to get James Bond. They wanted to get a library of 4,000 titles plus TV series. So there's a lot of catching up to do. Aside from that, one of the companies that I've always admired is CJ Entertainment from Korea. They have really figured things out in terms of how do you make content that travels the entire globe. And many of their movies and shows are remade in multiple countries, whether it's the United States or Southeast Asia. So their content travels very well, and they've been able to leverage that in a very interesting way. In India,
content though.
I'm sorry.
So K-dramas are a huge hit. So is K-pop in India. But what is it in their content that really stands out that has global appeal? Is it the storytelling? Is it just what is it?
Yeah, it is the storytelling. I mean, and not just K-drama, but there was like a movie called Little Miss Granny, which was about a young person who comes back as an old person, very high concept. It's been remade, all over Asia and now in the United States. Just hit something. So I think, but there is the whole Korean phenomenon, whether it's the BTS bands or the K-pop. You just had this show. What's it called? Squid Challenge, which is the top show on Netflix right now. Doing better than American ones or Lupin or some of the Money Heist, some of the other top shows. So they just have a way to figure out what's interesting to a global audience. And what I find particularly interesting is that it's not English language, right? So given that, you would think it limits the content traveling. So, I mean, just get back to India. I think what's happening there is that the content creators are also having to differentiate. I mean, you mentioned earlier on that I work with Plaza Entertainment. I think they're one of the interesting, innovative companies in India in the sense that they, for a large part of the programming they make for OTT platforms, they kind of take a risk and invest their own money and then sell to the platform kind of the finished product. And they've been very successful in doing that, figuring out, what the OTT platforms want to buy, and have gotten into the business of taking international shows that have worked, whether it's The Office or Fauda or Luther or, Call My Agent, which is the newest one, which is coming on Netflix, and making those for the Indian market. So, one of the things I think always challenging for a producer, whether they're in India or anywhere else, is how do you build your company if you have to give up your IP? So one of the downsides of being a producer is that, you have to, if you can't come up with the capital of your own and take that risk, you're basically going to work for a Netflix as a producer for hire. You get your margin, you get your upside, but they own your IP. So you're not growing your company. And I think for those companies that can do that, they're going to be further on down the road because they're going to have a library again. And at the end, your value is in your library. Kind of in the United States, there used to be the syndication business. So in the United States, when a television show had over 100 episodes, it would be syndicated, which meant it would come off the broadcast network and would be sold to other secondary broadcasters around the world, or around the country and around the world in different markets. And that's how you would make your money. You would make your back end. It's getting much more difficult now to do that if you are a producer without financial resources. So I think the downside right now is with the OTT platforms is that you can't go out and say, pre-sell your show like you used to in Germany or in the UK to raise money. And then you finance the deficit, sell it, but keep certain rights. So the model is shifting. And I think, producers are happy because more content is being bought. They can produce more. And for those that produce a lot of shows, it's great. But it's going to be tougher making the kind of, big income that you used to be able to do.
And also you're saying that you have to give up your IP?
In many cases, you have to give up your IP. Like take a show like Lupin, right, which is a big hit in France, which Gaumont produced.
Yeah.
They basically, the IP is owned by Netflix, and also very importantly, the remake rights are owned by Netflix. So if you wanted to remake Lupin in India, you can't buy the rights from Gaumont because they don't have them. So you can make it maybe for Netflix, but again, you would make it as a producer for hire. With a show like Call My Agent, which is not owned by Netflix, but by TF1 in France, one is able to buy the format, make it, and then sell it to the platform. And that's what's happened with Call My Agent. That's an interesting one because it's been remade in India just now. It's being remade in the UK and the US. It's one of those that just has legs and travels. So, I think especially the remake business, which is very important, especially in Asia, especially in India. I think it's making a huge comeback. There's so many shows being remade now, which is only possible because the platforms have changed. The buyers have changed.
What is the upside to this, though? I understand that the IP may not remain with the studio, but what is the upside of working with the big platforms?
I mean, as a producer, the upside is certainly that you have a buyer that just writes the check and you don't have to worry about that. Secondarily, I think if you're selling to Amazon or Netflix, your product is seen in the whole world, in 140 countries. So which would have never happened before. It just opens up the world. The content travels so much further, and you get to be known for producing great content. I mean, when these platforms go into different markets, they have to figure out which producer am I going to work with in that market, and it's always a big education game. If they've already seen your show on Netflix, they already know, oh, this must be a good producer because we bought the show, Netflix bought it. So let's work with them. So I think having worked like in Germany and in different European countries and Asian countries, I think it's fantastic for producers because all of a sudden you could have an audience of 100 million people, watching your show, whereas before that would never be the case, right?
While producing for the world, what is the key differentiator that you notice in Asian markets, and what are the opportunities here compared to the West? Besides the audience and besides the population, what's really the differentiator in this market?
I mean, it goes back to the type of stories to some extent. Now, I think theatrical hasn't changed that much in India in terms of the type of movies that are being made. I do think there are more opportunities now for different genres, and a lot more biopics and things like that are being made that may not have been made before. I think in India and in Asia in general, what you have are very large populations of different language speakers, whether it's Hindi or Tamil or Mandarin, that are able to basically, you can produce for the domestic market and do great. You don't need to export your movie, because if you compare it to a market like Germany with a much smaller population, you're still dependent on those international sales. But in India, I think the differentiator is there is all this history, there's all the mythology, there's so much to grab onto. There's so many stories that have not been told. One project that we're trying to work on is to tell the East India Company story in India, and the British Indian and the Chinese opium smuggle and so forth. So I'm also very hopeful, that there will be projects that travel more. And what I mean is, yes, Lupin, which is a pure French show, people will watch in India and the United States. But what I'm hoping is that more projects will get made globally, kind of under the old co-production model, where you bring different territories together to tell a story that creatively makes sense. And I think that is now very possible with Indian partners.
Rick, you've been actively working on the film financing side for the studios. You've worked with German investors, and you also mentioned earlier about production and tax incentives. Could you tell us your experience working with film commissions, if you have, and in general, how production and tax incentives can add value? This is more from the perspective of the growing incentive and production tax ecosystem in India. Our government has been extremely cooperative. So if you could share with us some best practice.
Yeah, I mean, Vic Roy is a good friend of mine from the Film Facilitation Office, and I do work closely with NFDC and Film Bazaar and so forth. So, I'm very encouraged about what India is trying to do, and I think it's extremely important. You know, most productions, whether they're American, European, or so forth, everybody looks at the tax incentives. Everybody looks at the soft money. I mean, it's the first thing that's done when you get a budget. You know, where can we shoot this? Where can we shoot it to get the most bang for the buck? You know, film commissions are very useful in terms of opening your eyes to a market, you know, and they do location shows, you know, where's the film commission from Georgia, for example, which is telling you, oh yes, we have a 30 or 35% tax rebate, you know, so it's an education process, and they reach out to different producers to try to get them to shoot your project there. But bottom line is you're just reducing the spend, you know. I mean, if you have a $20 million budget and you're getting, you know, $2 or $3 million in soft money, that's so much less you have to spend. So you know, everybody is looking at that. You know, all TV shows being made in Hollywood, so many are made in Canada because, you know, you get a federal tax credit, there's a state, sometimes even a city, sometimes even a special effects. So it's a very important part of the business. And from my years of working in Europe, a lot of films would never get made without that, you know, and countries like Germany and France or the UK have very strong tax incentives. So it's important in that sense. But reversely, it's very important in terms of attracting productions to your particular country. You know, people go to Malaysia because it has a 30% tax deal. People go to the UK because of that. You know, New Zealand basically lived off of Peter Jackson's movies, Lord of the Rings, for years, right?
4 years. 4 to 6.
So, you know, it's crazy that India does not have that. You know, I mean, I know India has it in certain states, and it's being worked on, but it's tremendously important because, especially India, which has the rich history in cinema, which has, you know, fantastic crews, fantastic directors, fantastic creators, all locations you could ever want, you know, from the Himalayas to the jungles, anything and everything. I think, you know, it's a boom for tourism. I think, you know, India, people are learning more and more about it. And if there was a great tax incentive scheme, you know, there's no reason not to go to India.
What is the advantage of working in countries, like you said earlier, Canada, and I think even Australia, where there's a federal and provincial tax rebate? I mean, what is the extra benefit that one can get? India still does not have a federal tax incentive, and
Right.
industry is actively pushing for it. And we're hoping the government will support us. But, you know, just wanted to know from a practical perspective, what are the benefits, and, you know, why would it really change the scale, you know, of attracting productions?
Well, I mean, the practical benefit is just the money that that country gives you to shoot there. You know, whether it's a cash rebate or a tax incentive, you're just reducing the money you actually have to spend. Now, of course, we have to calculate, you have to bring your crew there, or part of your crew, maybe just department heads, you know, ideally. In Australia, they have all the crew. You bring your department heads, but they want to attract those productions because they want the economic spend. And for that, they give you a tax rate, or they give you, you know, cash rebates to spend your money there. So you're just reducing your budget, you know. But you have to be creatively comfortable where you go. I mean, there have been crazy instances, you know, like Cold Mountain, which is a American Civil War movie, was shot in Bulgaria, I believe. You know, it makes no sense, but the locations were good enough, and you know, they could do it there. I mean, one of my favorite examples is a movie I worked on many years ago, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, which was a Chinese-Canadian co-production with German tax money in it.
Wow.
And so all the studio stuff was shot in Montreal, Canada. So we built all the sets there. And the reason for that was there was the federal incentive, and there was a Montreal incentive, which has its own incentive. And then there's a co-production treaty between China and Canada, so you get mutual benefits. The Chinese Film Corporation came in, so it qualified as a co-production. So in turn, you get a more favorable return on the theatrical release in China, because it's a Chinese domestic film, not a Chinese foreign film. Then you had the German tax money, which was a big German tax write-off for the investors. And between all that, this movie, which, cost over $100 million to make, we saved about $20 million, so it's very much worth your while. Now it's extremely complicated, takes lots of lawyers and accountants, to figure all these things out. And many times you have to bring in banks, which like lay out some of the gap money or pre-finance the tax credits. But it's a whole business, especially Canada, countries like Canada and Australia live off of this, they're experts at this. And, they have studio facilities too. That's the other important part, right? You go to Australia, you have the Fox studios.
Yes.
In Canada, you have all kinds of studios. You go to Malaysia, you have Pinewood Studios. In China, in Qingdao, they built these giant studios for the Wanda Group, and some big international co-productions were shot there. So there are a number of things coming together, but if you don't explore it, at least, you could be leaving money on the table.
In your experience, have you come across any country that has worked on a production from scratch with respect to the script? And then, of course, if there isn't a competitive tax incentive, but really, providing other facilities, probably labor resources, ease of filming, have you come across any such country you'd like to take us through? Because in India, I understand that not all states can, give the kind of incentives you see in other countries because they're states. Until the federal incentives come, what they could really learn is how can they really work with productions right from this, start, even from the storyline.
Right. I mean, there's getting access to that. And I think, having the commissions, like NFDC or Film Facilitation Office does at Cannes and other markets is important. You got to get the story out there. You got to let people know you have this, but you also have to make it really easy. You like with India, there needs to be one place to go where you can get all this done. If you're shooting in UP and Maharashtra and Kerala, you don't want to go to 3 different places and have to figure all this out, right? So you need somebody who's coordinating this all for you. But as an example, when we were working in Germany, we were doing a submarine movie, and it just came down to we needed a water tank, right? A giant water tank. And there aren't a lot of places that have that, but Malta does. So Malta, which is a tiny island in the Mediterranean, has built its whole tax incentive scheme around that, having this water tank. Wow. And anyone in Europe who is producing something with underwater, that's where they go. So that's just one microcosm, example of line producers. Once they get the script, they read through it, they know the locations. The first thing they then do is, where can we shoot this, right? And yeah, if it's a small TV movie or something, yeah, we can just shoot it maybe locally, but not even the United States. They're all thinking about Canada for the same reason, and not just Canada, but we have states in the United States like Georgia that provide very strong tax incentives, or New Mexico or Michigan, California now. For a while, all the productions were leaving California because we didn't have a tax incentive, which is crazy. It's where the business is. Yeah. It'd be like Maharashtra, that, supporting the movie industry. So we now have that. So a lot more is being shot here at home, and most people are happy about that because they don't have to travel. But so, it's getting the word out and making yourself an attractive destination. And, once somebody goes to some place like Canada, New Zealand, wherever it may be, and they have a positive experience, others follow.
Right. That's really, really interesting. And of course, Rick, this is the last question. Thank you again for your time. I want to leave our audience with a thought from you. What's your advice for young content creators, and how can they navigate the system to find success?
Sure. I think you have to really stay flexible. You have to evolve, learn, do by learning, don't fight change, believe in yourself. And really now we have this global interconnected world, so that it both opens more opportunities, but also makes it more competitive, because now, someone in Japan is doing this job, and in India and in the United States. It used to be, the old way to get into the business, at least in the United States, to get your foot in the door, was you would come in, work for a talent agency. I'm using the Hollywood model, or as an assistant, and work your way up. The business hadn't really changed for a long time. It's kind of still run under the old-fashioned model. Now, with tech companies coming in, and with streamers, and with other things becoming important, like algorithms to figure out who's watching your product, having all this technology now, I think you have to become a lot more tech savvy than we did during my time. And what we have now is the gig economy. You're not going to just work for 1 or 2 or 3 employers. That's long, long gone. If you're a freelancer, you're looking for new things all the time anyway, but you're always moving on to something else. So you have to continually learn, and stay on top of things. And, to me, what's very heartening is international has become so important that you have to become really a global citizen now. You have to learn about different cultures, what kind of content do they like? How does it work there? And it's not sort of the old Hollywood arrogance. We know how to do everything better, and we'll tell you what to do. It's all changed. The playing field has changed. But I think what's exciting for young people is there are much more opportunities now, globally. And I think through one's career, one's going to have the opportunity to live in different countries, to work in different countries, and to do all kinds of different things. So it's just important to evolve with what is happening and stay on top of it, or stay ahead of it as much as you can.
That's amazing. Thank you, Rick. And thank you so much for sharing such invaluable insights with us. And have a lovely day. And we hope.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and thank you for having me. It was really great fun, and I learned a lot as well.